Hello, underachievers. I have a demand. It's not really a demand. You don't have to do it, but I have a brand new song out. It's called I Know Better. The music video is also out. Also, sorry that this video is late. It's been very hard to film because it's very hot and for other reasons.
I have this thing, it's ADHD.
So anyway, trans people, transgenders, transsexuals, transvestigations, transport. Transport? Why do I say transport, but I say transgender? Should I not say transgender? Anyway, trans people, unpopular opinions about them. What are they? As a transgender myself, I have, I have seen a lot of unpopular opinions about trans people. Trans people right now are quite unpopular, apart from us in this video. Type W in the chat for trans rights. You could just type trans rights though, to be fair. I asked you guys to send in unpopular opinions that people have about trans people. And by the way, if somebody sends in an unpopular opinion that's kind of terrible, that doesn't necessarily mean that they have that unpopular opinion, it just means that they might have heard it. So, first unpopular opinion about trans people. It's really dumb to obsess over the rules of labels. Gender is bendy, who cares? Yes and no. I agree with this and I disagree with this. I disagree with this because I don't necessarily think it's dumb that people obsess over labels. I understand if you're feeling quite confused and you just want to know who you are and you just want to understand yourself, then you would be drawn to trying to find a label. Because I feel like the society we live in is very label-oriented. Speaking from experience, it can be very confusing. Not really understanding who you should be, who you want to be, who you feel like. But also, I feel like I get your point. I do agree, gender can be bendy. Not everyone's gender is bendy. If you got a gender bendy, comment your address. But yeah, I mean, I feel like the older that I've got, not to be that patronizing guy, because I'm literally 23 and an absolute child, but the older I've gotten, the less that I care about labels. I mean, I'm bi, I'm trans, I also like to call myself gay, even though I'm not gay, I'm actually bi, but the word gay doesn't necessarily mean gay, because we live in 2023, and words don't have meaning, apparently. I'm joking. But yeah, I don't really care anymore. I mean, like, some people would say I'm pansexual, even though, like, I just don't vibe with that word. Some people who are pansexual may be told that they're bisexual, even though they don't vibe with that word. Labels were just created to help other people understand you. So if you're not really that bothered about people necessarily everybody understanding every single detail about your identity, then like, yeah, who cares? Unpopular opinion number 2 is they give the best head, and I'm just gonna swipe past that because I would not say that that's unpopular.
Oh my god. Time and place.
Unpopular opinion, the progress flag looks dumb, and the idea that trans people had to be added in is insulting. No, I don't really agree with that. I mean, I remember when the progress flag, first came out, it first dropped, new flag just dropped. Back in the day, because I'm a trans elder. I remember being like, well, why did they change it? Because I don't like change. And I know that a lot of people have the view that people of color and trans people already feel included in the rainbow flag, and that's cool, that's good for them. I don't think it's a bad thing that we're, visibly including people of color in the flag, because I know that in a lot of gay spaces, a lot of trans spaces, a lot of bi spaces, a lot of queer spaces, there's a lot of racism. So I can understand wanting to include people of color directly in the pride flag, and including trans people directly in the pride flag. I don't agree it's insulting. But again, like, there are lots of things that I don't care, and if people of color and trans people feel better about the fact that the flag has changed now, then good for them. Like, why would you be angry about it? Don't on your parents when they don't get your pronouns perfect right after you come out to them. I would say number 1, don't on your parents ever, unless they are terrible and abusive, or just really annoying and mean. I don't know if this is a unpopular opinion, and I absolutely understand this because I was exactly like this when I was 16. Like, when I first came out as trans, when I first realized I was trans, I was like, other trans people are so sensitive. Like, why do you have to be so sensitive just because your parents didn't get your pronouns right for the 28th time? And like, I get why we're forced to feel like that. I feel like there aren't many kids that are like shitting on or like beating up or like bullying their parents for not getting their pronouns right. Personally, it doesn't feel great when you get misgendered by people. It's not a fun time. I also understand that, like, yeah, you shouldn't be rude to people just because they get your pronouns wrong accidentally. I feel like a lot of people just assume that trans people are stupid and they just don't understand anything, because a lot of the time they're just like, actually no, consider this though, trans person. I've actually never met a trans person before, but you must understand, as you don't, that it's kind of hard for you to change the way that you see someone and the pronouns that they use and their name. Like, we know this. Like, we know it's difficult. We know when people have made a mistake in misgendering us, but we also know when they haven't. So, like, absolutely, yeah, like, blowing up on people that have accidentally misgendered you, not the vibe. Not cool. If you can help not doing that, that would be great. But I also understand that, like, it's quite hard. It's quite hard being misgendered by people you love. Using they, them pronouns for someone who you know doesn't use them is misgendering. Yes, I agree with this. And this is a really annoying conversation to have with people that don't quite understand it. Absolutely, if you don't know somebody's pronouns, and you think they may be a little bit androgynous, you haven't quite picked up on the vibes that they're maybe trying to put across, yeah, use they, them pronouns. It's an easier way to just not completely screw it up. But again, if you know someone's pronouns and you still use they, them, like, if somebody calls me they, even though they know explicitly that my pronouns are he, because they literally are in my bio, and people around me exclusively use he, him, there's no way that you think my pronouns are they, then yeah, like, it is misgendering. And I know that this is a thing that a lot of transphobes do, or a lot of people that, like, don't get it. They just don't get it. I know that a lot of people do that because, you know, they see a trans boy and they're like, oh, I don't subscribe to gender ideology. I don't personally agree with that, so I won't call him a she because that would be just rude. I'll call them they. I think that people think that we don't notice. We are, like, hyper aware of that stuff. So, like, absolutely, yeah, it is misgendering to use they, them pronouns for somebody that you know doesn't use those pronouns. Unless you're talking about them and someone else in the plural. That is fine. Some people are using AFAB and AMAB, by the way, that means assigned female at birth and assigned male at birth, to recreate the gender binary, and it makes me so mad. I have seen a little bit of this. I feel like, yeah, it is a bit odd and strange and a little bit uncomfortable when some trans people, or even just some cis people in trans spaces, when they put a lot of meaning on the gender that trans people around them were assigned at birth. Because usually as trans people, that's like not something we vibe with. I need to stop saying vibe like that. I can't help it. Like, I don't constantly want to be reminded, hey, oh, so you're AFAB, assigned female at birth, you know, you were born with that. It's weird, but yeah, no, I absolutely see this, and it is annoying. Binary trans people have it harder than most non-binary people. This is just not true. I think it's really hard to generalize something like this, because, like, what are most non-binary people like? Like, what are most trans people like? What are most binary trans people like? There are so many people that would have completely different identities that could have very similar experiences, and a lot of people with the exact same identities that have very different experiences. So, like, here's an example. Take a non-binary person, and they don't change their pronouns, they don't change how they express their gender, you know, they don't dress differently, they don't medically transition, they don't do anything like that. That's one experience of a non-binary person. But there are also, like, non-binary people over here on my left hand. There are non-binary people over here that, you know, change their names, change their pronouns, change entirely how they look on the outside. They medically transition. Some go further than I have in terms of medical transition. There are non-binary people that have gotten bottom surgery, and I haven't, and I'm a binary trans guy. These two people are still non-binary, and these two people could have the exact same experience as some binary trans people. So, like, no, I don't agree. I think what this person is getting at is that, like, there's some non-binary people that, like, don't noticeably do anything publicly that would, like, differentiate themselves from cis people, apart from being like, oh, I'm not binary. And that's absolutely fine. Like, you should not care about what people do in terms of that kind of stuff. But yeah, with the person over here, the non-binary person over here, remember this one? Would they have an easier time than this non-binary person who has gone through medical transition, changed their name, blah, blah, blah? Yeah, they probably would have an easier time, but that doesn't mean that every non-binary person is like this. Because remember, this person is still non-binary. Unpopular opinion, Dylan Mulvaney is annoying. I don't find her annoying. Yeah, she's, like, quirky, she's upbeat, she's excited for life, she's hyperactive. I don't find her annoying. And I also don't think it helps out anybody by other trans people being like, yeah, I get it. I get why Dylan gets that hate, because she is annoying. I've seen a lot of that. Not entirely helpful. Boys with boobies who like/don't mind them shouldn't get so much hate. Yeah, I mean, like, I'm not gonna lie, it took me a long time to come to terms with that. Like, absolutely, they should not get hate. And I didn't think that they should get hate. I more just didn't understand. My chest made me so uncomfortable that I sometimes couldn't leave the house. I would bind 24/7. I damaged my ribs. I damaged my breathing. All because I was so uncomfortable with how my chest made me feel. But just because I experienced that doesn't mean that other trans people have to experience that. And to be honest, I would rather other trans people don't experience that, because I don't want, you know, other people to go through the same stuff that I went through. I'm not Buck Angel. I don't think you should suffer in order to be valid. That's not the vibe. I just said vibe again! But yeah, absolutely. I mean, if a trans person can be comfortable within the body that they're assigned at birth, good for them! They don't have to pay money to get private healthcare if they live in the UK. If I could choose between having to have surgery because I'm so uncomfortable and not having to have surgery, I would choose the second one. The UK is actually very trans-friendly and hospitable to us. Loud minority, and our government is the issue. So, yes. I think, yes. And not just I think, I know that the general attitude of the general UK population is, you know, gearing towards trans acceptance, not gearing towards transphobia. But, you know, we are going further towards transphobia because of the media, because of the government. I agree that it is a lot of loud voices, such as the last 3 prime ministers being anti-trans, and the majority of the people in government being anti-trans. I understand it is just a loud minority, it's not the majority of people. For me, at least, that doesn't make me feel any better. butter. It doesn't make me feel any better because the people in government, you know, they influence the people that aren't in government through their misinformation, their lies, their transphobic propaganda. And then we just end up suffering a violent amount of bigotry. So yes, I agree, it is the loud minority. I don't think the majority of the people in the UK are transphobic. But I think if we keep going the way that we are, I don't know. Never date a straight person because they'll only see you as the sex you were born with instead of your gender. I disagree with this, but I understand maybe where this, like, insecurity would come from. Because I definitely felt this, and, you know, there's still something in my head that I'm like, if I ever did date a straight person, I feel like that would always be a thing running through my head. I know plenty of trans people that are in relationships with straight people, and it's not an issue. And it never has been an issue, so, like, no. Unpopular opinion, trans people face more hate and violence than gay people. I mean, like, I don't know the exact numbers. I'd say that nowadays, the majority of, you know, the bigoted media is geared towards eradicating trans people, specifically. But they are just rehashing the arguments that they used against gay people in the 1980s, where they're like, oh, they're not safe in our bathrooms or our changing rooms, and they're grooming our children. They're saying the same stuff that they said about gay people, about trans people nowadays. But, like, we're a team. Like, we're a team, so we don't need to be like, oh, I experience it worse. Even if it is true. You can go enjoy Harry Potter world and still be a supporter of trans people. So, like, technically, yeah, it's possible for you to not be transphobic and, you know, to support the trans people in your life and around the world and still go to Harry Potter world. But what you are doing is also supporting, monetarily, you're financially supporting a big transphobe who is only making things worse. So, like, yeah, I mean, like, you can support trans people, but you're also supporting transphobia. Which I would say maybe that isn't supporting trans people. I don't know. I know that realistically, like, buying one ticket to Harry Potter world or, like, buying one Harry Potter book is not gonna make that much of a difference to J.K. Rowling, but, like, I just, like, ethically am against that, and I would advise others, if they were wanting to read Harry Potter, to buy old Harry Potter to buy old Harry Potter books, so that the money isn't going directly to her. But, like, sure. I mean, sure. You don't need to tell the person you're dating you're trans unless you want to. That is an unpopular opinion. I disagree. I know that there are a lot of trans people that are just like, I've had surgery, like, I don't need to. I just, like, that's a big secret. I guess it depends, like, if you're not sleeping with them, it will maybe be different. If you're just, like, going on a few dates, it's just a one-off thing, you're not exclusive, you don't see it going towards a relationship, then, like, yeah, sure, you don't need to tell everybody on the first date that you're trans, maybe if you're not, you know, if it's not coming up. I personally would, just because I wouldn't want to date someone and then potentially find out that they're not into me or that they have a problem with it. Like, that's just, like, to me, that is not a smart thing to do. It's not a safe thing to do. I would advise against it. Sure, you don't need to, technically. I think you should. Trans to faking mental disorders pipeline is real. Jesus, I screenshotted these a week ago, and I forgot about this one. Here's the thing, that, like, maybe in itself is an unpopular opinion. I personally think that if somebody is, you know, faking a mental illness, as in they're fully just pretending to have symptoms that they don't actually have, I would say that they probably have another mental illness, that is pushing them to do that. I don't think people that are mentally healthy pretend to have mental illnesses unless it's for their own gain. But there are other ways to get things that you want. So no, I would say that there's probably something up with you if you're faking mental illnesses. I get it. It happens. I'm not denying it happens. I also think a lot of people have a tendency to tell people that they're faking a mental illness, even though they aren't. I just don't think being trans has anything to do with that. And I think, as a whole, we need to be maybe a bit more sensitive towards people that maybe would fake a mental illness, because there's clearly something going on in their life that they feel they need to do that. Unpopular opinion, their names can be cringy. Like, I used to know someone who used to go by Arson. I mean, sure, I agree that some trans people choose cringy names. Look, if cis people had the opportunity to, which they absolutely do, but less commonly. If cis people had the opportunity to just change their name, I think a lot of them would choose some silly names. But, like, I get it. I mean, like, I think the name Arson is cool. Unpopular opinion. I think that, like, when you're trans and you're in queer spaces a lot, there's a lot of quirkiness. There's a lot of gender nonconformity. There's a lot of general nonconformity. There's a lot of, you know, like, destroying roles and all that kind of stuff. And I think to go through what a lot of trans people have to go through, you kind of care less about how people feel about you, which I think may lead to people choosing, like, cringy names, like Arson. I used to think it was embarrassing when I was 16, because I was like, you're making the trans community look bad, but that's dumb. If people hate trans people, they're gonna hate them, regardless of whether they're called Twig, or arson. People who make being trans their whole personality are annoying. I mean, if I was 16, I would have agreed with you because I had a lot of internalized transphobia. I entirely understand why there are some trans people that make being trans their entire identity. I'm not one of them. The amount of people that think I am just because, like, my videos about trans stuff, of course it is, because that my audience is a lot. There's a lot of trans people. I understand making your entire thing about being trans because for a portion of my life, it was the only thing that I could think about because I was under so much distress, I was so uncomfortable, I had so much to fight for that I couldn't think about anything other than being trans. And I don't think... I think just calling people annoying because they're going through something like that, or even on, like, the flip side where, like, they're not struggling at all, they're having a great time. I don't think people celebrating that aspect of themselves, even if you find it cringy, even if you find it annoying, I don't think it's a bad thing. If a straight person dates an MB, they aren't really straight. So this is just like, this kind of thing, like, it just confuses me. So, does the person you're dating determine your sexuality? I don't think it does, because I think your sexuality, you know, it's entirely your own. It's your own identity. Like, I think a gay man is capable of dating a straight woman. I think it's possible. I don't think it's common. I don't think it happens much, or, you know, much at all. I've seen this a lot in real life and, like, on the internet, where there will be a non-binary person, kind of like how I described earlier, a non-binary person that, like, doesn't change how they present, they don't change their pronouns, they don't transition or anything. I've seen a lot of cases where people like that will date, like, straight men. And the non-binary person is still non-binary. But I have seen a lot of cases where the straight man doesn't really view their partner as non-binary, they usually just view them as a girl, because if they're assigned female at birth, that's all this, like, silly straight guy can think about. I don't necessarily think that just because this straight guy is in a relationship with a non-binary person, with a queer person, I don't think that makes a straight guy queer. I would say that, like, sure, like, it would be a queer relationship because it's a man dating somebody that's not a woman, so it's not straight. But I don't think that relationship means that the man himself isn't straight, if you get what I'm saying. I hope this is making sense. Because in this guy's mind, he doesn't see this non-binary person as non-binary. He sees it as a straight relationship, even though it's not. An example is, like, me and Corey are in, like, a gay relationship, you could say. Like, we're together, we're two men, we're in a gay relationship. But neither of us are gay. Like, the relationship doesn't change the sexuality. Like, the relationship doesn't change our personal identity. I think, personally, though, like, if you're straight and you're dating a non-binary person, and you're still calling yourself straight, and you haven't really thought about that, to me, that kind of just leads me to believe that you don't actually see your partner in the way that they actually identify. And I think, obviously, that's a problem. I get really annoyed when people start calling everything transphobic during June. For those that don't know, June is Pride Month. Unpopular opinion, you get annoyed. I mean, I agree that you do get annoyed. I don't get annoyed when people start calling everything transphobic. Yeah, I mean, if you phrase this in a way that was, like, applicable to the video, I would disagree. I think, sure, there will be a minority of trans people calling things that aren't transphobic, but I don't think that comes from anything other than the fact that, like, they've probably experienced a lot of transphobia, and it's difficult to not view everything through that lens because that's all you've experienced. I think that in the grand scheme of things, that's so uncommon that we just shouldn't be paying any attention to it. I think a lot of the time, people that have these views don't necessarily understand the extent to which transphobia can actually be carried. I think a lot of people don't understand that, like, even if they're not purposely being transphobic or hateful, they can still say transphobic things. Just because you maybe misspeak and say something that is transphobic, it doesn't mean that you're a massive bigot and that you're transphobic. It just means that you're capable of saying things that are transphobic. And in the society that we live in right now, that's very common. That happens a lot. It's very easy for that to happen. I think a lot of people don't really understand the depths of transphobia, so they may feel that, like, people saying that what they're saying is transphobic is upsetting and annoying, but I don't think that means that everybody is just calling things transphobic because it's Pride Month. Sometimes I kind of wish being trans was less known again, like a couple of years ago. Yeah, I agree. When I came out in 2017, so it was like 5 years ago, and that's not long. Realistically, that's not been a long time, but things were very different then. And although a lot more people maybe back then were more ignorant, I think there's a lot more people nowadays that are purposely ignorant. With the rise of turfism and people like Donald Trump just making their entire thing hating on trans people, it has made things a lot worse for a lot of trans people. But, you know, there is the flip side that more people that aren't massive bigots are more educated about trans people. So, you know, there's good things and bad things, but, like, yes, I absolutely wish this a lot of the time. So, here's a big one. Here's a discussion. HRT for kids should be banned, and I'm trans. I mean, it depends what you mean by HRT, but, like, no. It also depends what you mean by kids. Do I think they should be giving testosterone to 11-year-olds? Absolutely not. Is that actually happening? Absolutely not. There is so much fear-mongering around trans kids, and if you're a trans kid watching this right now, living right now, I am so sorry. with the amount of stuff that you have to put up with. I think it's ridiculous how much people are focusing on trans kids. For me, in terms of HRT and surgery, I think there isn't like one set rule of like when is the correct age for everybody to start HRT or to start hormone blockers. Everybody is different. Everybody has a completely different experience. There are some people that, you know, are born and at the age of 2, they're like, I'm a boy. And they stick to that throughout their whole lives and they just know their identity from a young age. But there's also some people that are like maybe like 13 years old and they think they're trans for a month and then the next month they realize that they're not. Those experiences, they're both entirely valid. But do I think a 16-year-old who was born a girl and has been presenting as a guy their entire life, do I think that they shouldn't be allowed testosterone just because there are some people that are 16 that maybe shouldn't be going on HRT? Like, no. It's on a case-by-case basis, and that is how it works, at least in the UK. Despite what the news says, no, there aren't doctors forcing kids onto HRT. No, there aren't teachers telling kids that they should be trans and get surgery and go on hormones. If you actually look into the medical system and the process that trans people actually have to go through, it's kind of dehumanizing how much personal details I had to hand over to a doctor who I had never met as a teenager. I don't know any trans people that think that we should be giving hormones to 11-year-olds, to 12-year-olds. I think 16 makes sense. There are things that you can do legally at 16 that you couldn't do when you were a child. By the time you've hit 16, there are kids around you whose voices are dropping and they're going through puberty, and I understand, you know, that's kind of difficult if you're not going through the puberty that you feel like you should be. So yeah, I think 16 makes sense. If you've known your identity for a while and, you know, you're pretty sure in it. I don't think a 16-year-old who only figured out that they were trans a week ago, I don't think they should be given testosterone, but that's common sense. That's the whole thing. I feel like nobody has any common sense anymore when it comes to this because they're just so blinded by transphobic media. A lot of young trans people need to go outside more. With love, a lot of discourse doesn't matter. I mean, yeah, sure. I don't think this is just young trans people, and I entirely understand how it happens because a lot of the time trans people are driven to only exist in online spaces because they can't exist as themselves in the real world. I entirely understand that because that was how I lived. But yeah, I am so exhausted by some of the discourse that goes on within the trans community. Do I care if a trans guy calls himself a lesbian? No. I don't care. That doesn't affect me in the slightest. There is no point getting mad about it. Do I care that a kid wants to use ze pronouns? No. Because it doesn't affect me. I don't care. There are much more important things that we should be focusing on, and I definitely think that that is a fault of the trans community. There is a lot of infighting. There's this idea that definitely exists in lefty spaces, which I am a part of. There's this idea that you have to be a perfect person. You can't make any mistake. You can't say anything wrong. There's a lot of pressure in that regard, and that's definitely present in the trans community. But yeah, I think we need to prioritize the important things way more than we already do. I've known since I was a little kid is invalidating to some trans people. No. I think what would be invalidating is telling a trans person that they're not trans because they didn't know when they were a kid. Like, this is me. This is me. I don't think me knowing that I was a boy since I was really young is invalidating to anybody's identity in the slightest, because I'm just talking about myself. Elliot Page isn't hot. You're just wrong. You're just incorrect. It's okay to still have doubt while going through hormones. This one is interesting to me. I know that for a lot of people, a lot of the doubt that they feel when, you know, they progress towards their transition is purely because the people around them are feeding them ideas that make them doubt more than they should be. I have spoken to a lot of trans people that were terrified to start testosterone because they had heard all these horror stories from people that aren't trans, and that can cause a lot of doubt. I've seen a lot of trans people say that, like, who cares, just go on hormones. If it's not the right thing, then it's not the right thing. Like, I personally don't agree with that. I don't think, like, medically detransitioning because you've maybe not thought it through enough, like, I don't think that's a fun experience. I've not experienced that myself. I think if we can lessen the amount of people that are making choices that they regret in the future, then that would be a good thing. I think a level of doubt, I guess, is normal. I cannot speak to that experience because I didn't have any doubt about going on testosterone. And I can't imagine that I would start testosterone if I had a lot of doubt. But I also understand where a lot of that doubt comes from, and it's not necessarily the trans person thinking that they're making the wrong decision, it's more just the people around them. I know a lot of trans people who doubted whether or not going on testosterone was the right decision for them, purely because they were worried about how people around them would react. So that makes sense. But I think, like, if you're doubting whether it's something that you want, if you're doubting whether you want specific changes from testosterone, leave it a bit, think it through a bit. I don't think the way for you to figure out whether you want that or not is to go through it. Because, you know, if your voice drops, your voice drops. It's not going back up. If you're making the personal choice to wait a bit, then there's no harm in that. I think you should have to be on hormones at some point in your life to be considered actually trans. No, that's dumb. No offense, but like full offense, that's dumb. There are so many reasons why a trans person wouldn't want to go on hormones. Some people can't go on hormones because of health reasons. Some people can't go on hormones because they wouldn't be safe in their environment, going on hormones. And some people just don't want to go on hormones. You don't have to medically transition to be trans. Like, transgender is literally, it's an identity. It's like how you are in the brain, not in the boob. Last one. Detransitioners shouldn't have a voice in discussions about trans people. No. Big fat no. Big fat hard no. I think I understand why some people may hold this view, because I've seen a lot of people weaponize detransitioners against trans people to try and say, oh, well, this person made the wrong choice, so that means all of you other people who are nothing like this person made the wrong choice. I think what a lot of detransitioners go through is, like, very similar to what we go through. I mean, imagine this. Say you're born as a girl, and you realize that you're very uncomfortable with your body, and then you think that going on testosterone, you know, will make you feel less uncomfortable. You go on testosterone, you have all those bodily changes. You just look like a big old man. That's not always how T works, but you know. And then at some point you realize that maybe your gender wasn't the problem and there are other things going on. Or maybe you realize that you just made a mistake, or maybe your identity just changes. And you then make the decision to detransition back into a woman. At that point, you're a woman with a deep voice, with broad shoulders. You have gone through masculine puberty. Trans women are women that have gone through masculine puberty. I'm sure a lot of people that were born girls that went through masculine puberty and then, you know, go back to being like, oh no, I'm definitely a girl. They probably experience transphobia in a way that is equally as distressing as it is for trans people that don't detransition. They experience a lot of what we experience. I don't think that they shouldn't have a voice within the community because they've experienced the same things as us. And also, I'll love to bring this up, a very, very, very large portion of people that detransition do so due to social pressure. They do it because the people around them aren't supportive and they're going through a tough time because they're in an environment where they're not supported. Do you think that they shouldn't be able to speak about their experience? I really disagree with that. And like, there are people that detransition. There will be people in the future that detransition. We should be giving them the support that they need, because I'm sure that's quite a difficult thing to go through, and if we're not the ones that are supporting them, who are? The TERFs, the transphobes. That's how they are weaponized. Bit of an odd one to end on, but I hope you enjoyed the video. Comment down below what your favorite pronoun is. Have a good day, don't. See you later, losers. Goodbye.